2,000 years ago, a rabbinic student named Shimon ben Zoma had a famous saying. He wasn't even a rabbi yet, and yet his saying was so profound it was saved in the Mishnah, which is the second most important paradox of Jewish culture. The Mishnah was a writing down of the oral law. And on some level there's a paradox there, but it's only the second most important paradox in Jewish culture. Now, as I read this passage from Shimon ben Zoma, I want to ask you, does this passage remind you of anyone that you knew? Ben Zoma said, "Who are wise? Those who learn from everyone. As it is said, from all my teachers I have been enlightened. Who are mighty? Those who control their passions. As it is said, those slow to anger are better than those who are mighty, and those who rule their spirits over those that take a city. Who are rich? Those who rejoice in their portion. As it is said, when you eat the labor of your hands, you will be happy, and it will be well with you. Who are honored? Those who honor all others." You see, these are all Sherwin Wine. Sherwin learned from everyone and everywhere to become enlightened and then to enlighten us. Sherwin controlled his passions. He was slow to anger, and he ruled his spirit in order to create coalitions, to found institutes, and to walk mere mortals into the ground on his early morning walks. Sherwin celebrated life. He enjoyed the fruits of his intellectual and his professional labors with his own hands and his own mind, and sharing them all with us. And Sherwin was content to be honored by honoring others. You may remember that he ended almost every phone conversation or personal conversation with, "Thank you." Sherwin was also the most important paradox of Jewish culture. He was a rabbi who challenged the sacred cows of rabbinic Judaism. He would often say, "The rabbis think this, but we think that." And I would say to myself, "But where are you?" You obviously agree with the second part, but the rabbis. Sherwin was never a non-believer. He would often say he had many beliefs. And one of the most important beliefs that he held was that there is no substitute for the dignity of saying what you believe and believing what you say. If you believe that people have the power to improve their lives, then say it. If you believe that we can and we must discover all that we can know about the universe, about our history, and about our very being, then say it. If you believe that the lesson of Jewish experience is that without guarantees we have to rely on ourselves and rely on each other, then say it and sing it and shout it from the rooftops. Even though he was never a cook, Sherwin knew that Jewish sacred cows make the best hamburgers. Now, Sherwin's loss in Morocco in this tragic car accident was painful, tremendously so, because he died, yes, at the end of a full and active life, but also in the middle of a full and active life. He was vibrant and full of energy, and he loved what he did. Sherwin inspired, and he led, and he founded, and he developed, and he wrote, and he spoke, and he spoke, and he spoke. He spoke the message of a secular humanistic Judaism. He was the founding chair of the International Federation of Secular Humanistic Jews. He was the founding dean and provost of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. He was a teacher. He was a mentor. He was a counselor, and he was a friend to most of the people in this room tonight. Now, Sherwin conceived of the Colloquium as our special contribution to the Jewish world and to the world as a whole. The truth as best we can discover it about the issues of the day. Our loss is that Sherwin is not here to guide us, but our gain is that he led us to water, this day and every day. And now we must choose to drink the life-giving enlightenment that he brought into the world for us. You see, he was more than just a personal friend and a counselor and a teacher and a philosopher. Sherwin has an honored place in our pantheon. not with the gods, but with the people, with those who celebrated our power to be in charge of our own lives, the power to ask crucial questions and to find the answers within ourselves, within each other, and without magic and miracles. It is a great honor for me this evening to invite to this podium, in a place where Sherwin's voice still echoes from the walls, Professor Yaakov Malkin. You see, Sherwin's message resonated beyond these walls, beyond this community, even beyond national borders and across the Jewish world. Almost 2 decades ago, a woman came to Detroit. She was the shlicha, the emissary from Israel to America, and what she found was a message to bring back to Israel from America. It was Sivan Mas, the first Israeli rabbi ordained by our institute, who spoke this evening. And she contacted her father, who was a professor at Tel Aviv University, tremendously accomplished in his own right, a professor of aesthetics and rhetoric, the founder and director of the first community art and culture center in Israel, and ever since, a strong and active leader in organized secular humanistic Judaism in the Jewish state. Professor Malkin is currently the academic director of Tumurah, the Israeli rabbinic program of the Institute, and also of Meitar, the College of Judaism as Culture. In fact, he serves as international co-dean of the Institute, supervising and directing the vision for our future. If anyone can give us a complete picture of Sherwin's place in the history of Jewish and of humanistic ideas, it's Yaakov Malkin. So you can see, Yaakov is not only famous for his daughter. For me, as the father of a 2-year-old, I can only imagine the special joy of being famous for your children's accomplishments. And for those who know Yiddish, it's a kind of reverse yichus, or in English you might say pedigree from posterity. Now, in addition to all of his accomplishments, Professor Malkin has become a prolific author of books of crucial importance to our movement, including 2 new ones that await you on the book table tomorrow, but about which he will speak this evening, including a new one that he has dedicated to the memory of Sherwin Wine. It is our privilege this evening that he is here to share his thoughts on Sherwin's legacy and on the importance of his message. Please welcome to this stage, Yaakov Malkin.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank you all. Of course, it is strange to stand here without Sherwin. For many years we were together. We were together in the effort to make secular Judaism known to people who are secular. It's one of the paradoxes. Most Jews in the world are secular. They only don't know it. It is the old Molière saying, I never knew that I always talk prose. People who are secular but do not know how to articulate their beliefs feel confused for no reason. Our task is to make them articulate their beliefs. Because their beliefs are very clear. Their way of life expresses their beliefs. No matter what the surveys say. Every survey in the world, when you ask people, do you believe in God? They say, yes, I do believe in God. On condition that you don't ask another question, what do you mean? And because people do not believe in God as a personal commander or a personal creator of the world who can rule their life, they live a life without God. Therefore, I called also my book Judaism Without God, because this is the life we live. And through our life we express our beliefs. Sherwin Wine was the first secular rabbi who decided to create forms, patterns, conducive ways of make people realize their own beliefs. This, I think, is his most important achievement. This is also the change in the history of modern Judaism that Sherwin caused. Because Sherwin was the first Rabbi Apikorus. The first Rabbi Apikorus in our time. The second Rabbi Epicurus in history. The first was about 2,000 years ago, Elisha ben Avuya. Because the history of Apikorsut is a very, very long history. Apikorsut is a very special word. It is taken from the name of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. Judaism is the only culture in the world that adopted the name of a Greek philosopher, Epicurus, and made it into a word in many Jewish languages, in Hebrew, in Yiddish, in Ladino, and others. To be an Epicurus for many Jews meant a derogative name because they were religious. To be Epicurus for Sherwin and for me was a word of pride because we are Apikorsim. Because we knew the philosophy of Epicurus, the first man who created the notion that not only is happiness a way of life, like Aristotle said, but happiness is the aim of life. It's the target of life. It's the target of morality. There is no other way of measuring moral or immoral deeds except if they contribute or harm happiness. And Sherwin was one of the great prophets of happiness. The 2,000 years of the history of Apikorsut, of this belief that a human being is free to choose his own way towards happiness, start actually in the Bible. 2 books in the Bible were directly influenced by the Epicurean philosophy that started to spread all over the Mediterranean in the 3rd century BC and during the whole Hellenistic times for about 700 years. Ecclesiastes and Job, both outspoken anti-religious books that the genius editors of the Bible included them in this anthology, which represents the Jewish culture of the first 1,000 years of its creation. 2 books in which God is blamed. Blamed because he doesn't do justice in our world, because people suffer. People do not have the happiness that they were promised. 2 books that were created and were considered by many as heresies, because Apikorsut was considered as a heresy. But heresies stem only from beliefs. There is no belief that stems from heresy. Every heresy stems from a belief. All religious people are heretics because their belief in creation and the Creator makes them heretics as far as evolution is concerned, as far as the scientific picture of the world is concerned. All non-religious believers are also heretics. They do not believe that the world was created in 6 days, 4,000 and some years ago, or 6,000 and some years ago, 2,000 years after the Babylonians already drank beer. We just don't believe it. It's not true. Why don't we believe it? Because we do believe in a scientific picture of the world. So all heresies stem from beliefs. And as was said already tonight, Sherwin was a great believer. And because of that, he was a great heretic. His belief, his faith in humanism, in the freedom of human being, in the happiness that we have to strive to, as the aim of morality, made him an atheist. Atheist means atheist, non-theist, non-religious. There are various kinds of atheists. There are some atheists, as Chaim Cohen says, the difference between an atheist and agnostic is that an atheist knows that there is no God. An agnostic doesn't know that there is a God. The difference is very little. Both do not take in consideration the God as a creator and as a commander of their life. Woody Allen tells us that he divorced his wife because he was an atheist and his wife was an agnostic, and they couldn't agree on the non-religious education of their children. Which means that the differences between the various non-religious beliefs are less important than the common denominators of these non-religious beliefs. The beliefs, like Sherwin did, in the freedom of a human being to choose his way, in the freedom of a Jew to choose his Judaism, to realize his life according to his own principles. His influence was great. Maybe we have only 30 or 40 communities, secular communities in America, but there are more and more people who start to know about it. The influence, his influence on Israeli culture is very, very important. Because Israelis pretend sometimes to teach diaspora how to be Jews. But in this case, Israelis learn from the diaspora, from Sherwin, how to create frameworks in which we can realize our secular, humanistic, atheistic beliefs. There are now 8 secular rabbis in Israel. 10 years ago, nobody could believe it. Nobody could believe that there is such a thing as a secular rabbi. Now, in Israel, nobody is amazed anymore that there are secular rabbis. Secular rabbis, like Sivan, are members of councils of rabbis. Rabbis, Reform rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, conservative rabbis, are willing to sit with a secular rabbi in one council. Suddenly, when the army makes a course in Judaism, in pluralistic Judaism, they do not invite only an Orthodox, a Reform, and a conservative as they used to do. They have to invite a secular rabbi. Suddenly, secular Judaism became legitimized. And this is one of the many influences of Sherwin Wine. In my own family, his influence, of course, was great, and we were ready for it. Many of you know already that I consider myself a traditional Jew, an atheist, a son of an atheist, a grandson of an atheist. But now I am proud to announce that I'm also a father and a grandfather of atheists. So our tradition was ready for Sherwin. And therefore, we were not amazed at all when our grandson was to be bar mitzvah and was asked what portion of the week, or that portion of the week that was designed by him by some accident of calendar, if he wants it. He said, no, he doesn't want it. He doesn't want any portion of the week. He wants the Bible. And we asked him, what do you mean? He said, I was always interested in God. This is one literary character that always fascinated me. And I'd like to make my bar mitzvah a trial of God. Because he did some very important things in making some important just laws, but he transgressed all his laws. The most important law was, thou shalt not kill, but he killed all the time. He is to blame for massacres of multitudes of people, like in the flood. He is to blame for the killing of 3,000 Jews who admired God in the form of a golden calf. He is to blame for the opposition, led by Korach, the opposition to Moses, that when they expressed their views as an opposition against nepotism, he opened the earth and buried them alive. I mean, this is terrible murders. And I'd like to make my bar mitzvah a trial against the murders of God. Well, his mother and myself, of course, agreed immediately to help him if he wants. And she, as a secular rabbi, organized this fest. There were 90 people in our garden, and the grandfather, the other grandfather, invited him as the prosecutor, and he decided to say all those things that he said, that I just said. I'm sure that Sherwin would enjoy every word of it. Then he invited two witnesses. One was his uncle, a professor in Tel Aviv University, who played the role of Jonas, the prophet that escaped God because he knew that God will have pity on capital of empires that are murderers like Nineveh, like Berlin, and like others. Then he invited another witness, Job, the man who lost his family, his children, his children's children, because God made a pact with Satan. They bet if he will believe in God or not. And Tomer, the bar mitzvah boy, claimed that in the end of the book of Job, when finally God agrees to answer the questions of Job, he answers irrelevant answers. He doesn't explain why he did this terrible thing, this pact with Satan. He says that he's busy with other things. He's busy with keeping the world in existence. A typical deistic approach, because atheism has many things, agnosticism, pantheism, and deism. Deism, which was also the religion of Epicurus, which said, well, maybe there are gods, but they are not in this world. They are between the worlds. They have nothing to do with us, we have nothing to do with them. And therefore they are not interfering in our life, and we should not be interfering in their life. In the end of this bar mitzvah trial, the 12 jurors agreed with the prosecutor that he is guilty as charged. And because he's a literary character, the question was, how do you defend him? Of all people, he chose me to be the lawyer of the case. Well, you can imagine that it was very difficult. The only thing I could do was, because I couldn't deny anything that was written in the Bible, because it's written, and since he's a literary character, everything written about him in literature must be true. So the only thing I said was, maybe you are right, but he's not capable of being brought to trial, because God is the only creature in the world that doesn't know the difference between good and bad. Because as you remember, Eve, when she ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and she made her great revolt against the original sin of God, who forbade eating from this fruit, from this tree, she gave it to her husband, but she didn't give it to God. So God, as a psychopath, could not be tried. My grandson decided that everything I said was completely irrelevant. Because he said, you have to understand, we are trying God according to the laws of God. And God doesn't have a law in which insane people or insane gods cannot be tried. He can be tried. He should be tried. And his conclusion was, therefore, we cannot punish him physically, but we can change the way of our education. We should read the Bible in a different way. We should realize that God cannot be idealized because God made, or in his name, they made just laws, but he was also a criminal murderer. Now, this kind of approach is very Jewish, very atheistic, very Sherwin-like. This is the reason I dedicated this book, Epicurus and Apikorsim, the influence of the Greek philosopher and the Apikorsim that went in his way on Judaism. I think this is the most important influence, besides the influence of our classic literature, the Bible. In this book, I'm trying to describe the way Apikorsim, the heresy that stems from the belief, started from the time of the Bible, through the Hellenism, through Middle Ages, till today. But of course, most of the writings of Apikorsim, of heretics, disappeared. Was not allowed, was forbidden, and we almost don't have any, except for names. We know Elisha ben Abuya, we don't know what he said. But here was an interesting accident. In the height of the development of the Abbasi Empire in Baghdad in the 8th and 9th century. And when Sherwin talked to me about this colloquium, I thought how wise a man he is to bring us together with people who speak in a rational way about the Islam, because the Islam and Judaism, since the 7th, 8th century, developed together. You cannot understand Maimonides unless you know the influence of Muslim philosopher on Maimonides. But even earlier, Maimonides is 12th century, but even earlier, when you come to this wonderful period of the Abbasi Empire, a very short time after the Muslim conquest of Iraq and of the Middle East, the Muslim empire opened itself to the cultures of the world. They were the ones who translated Aristotle and Greek philosophy into Arabic, and through their translation, many years ago, later, 13th, 14th century, Europe started to learn the Greek philosophers, which were forbidden by the Christian church from the 4th, 5th century till the 13th century. And in this very short period of about 200, 300 years, there was a big flowering of rationalistic movements in Muslim culture. And they influenced many Jews. One of them, a man called Chivi Habalchi, which I dedicate a chapter to him because he is one of the great Apikorsim of the past in the Muslim world, lived in a place called Khurasan on the road, on the Silk Road to China, where Persian, Arab, Jewish, and other scholars met. And in this atmosphere of new thinking grew up this great Epicurus who wrote a book of 200 questions asking about everything, about the morality of God, about the veracity of the Bible. The 200 questions disappeared. But their influence was so strong that 100 years later, almost 100 years later, the great Jewish philosopher Saadia had to answer them. And through his answers, we know what the questions were. So here is an Epicurus who went underground, not by his own initiative, but by the fact that his writings were disappeared, but was discovered to us by a religious philosopher, one, again, a man who tried to be as rational as many of the Mutazila, the big movement of people, Muslims who call themselves the people of justice and unity. These people, mainly one of the scholars by the name of El-Jahs, in the 9th century, said the doubt is more important than the fear of God when you want to be wise. Another one by the name of El-Jumayl, a Sufi scholar, said a man cannot reach a serious level of truth unless thousands of his friends say that he's a heretic. In other words, the fact that you are in argument, in controversy, in doubt, is good, because your beliefs become stronger when they are examined by doubt, while they are examined by controversy. Ibn Atta, one of the first scholars of the Mutazila, spoke about how we have to negate all characteristics of God. We cannot understand God in human terms. We can understand God only in negative human terms, and those who know Maimonides know that this is one of the sources of his philosophy. So that in this atmosphere of openness to other cultures, to openness to rationalistic movements, to openness to reform, to controversy, in this atmosphere, not only Shivi Habalchi could ask his 200 questions, but there could start a dialogue between Jews and Muslims, and an intellectual dialogue which could bring them to peace, to make them live in peace. We are living in a different period. We are living in the Third World War. I live in Israel, almost on the border of the two worlds that are fighting each other today. And this is not because of two religions, but because of the fanatics that became the dictators of the Muslim world, or of a big part of the Muslim world. The Muslim history has a lot of important writings and important philosophy and important contribution to humanity. The dictators in the Muslim policy are fighting all of it, are fighting all doubt, are fighting all criticism, are fighting democracy, are fighting controversy. So in a way they are fighting their own sources. We are fortunate to live in the West with an openness to all cultures. We are fortunate to live in a globalization world very similar to one of the Hellenism. We are fortunate to live in a world where great heretics like Sherwin Wine, whose heresy stems from his belief, enables us to invite to a colloquium Muslim and Arab speakers, experts in the two worlds, because we can look at these worlds from a humanistic, atheistic point of view. And therefore, we can continue the way of Sherwin Wine in this openness to other cultures, in the light of our belief in humanity and peace, in spite of having all these difficulties, in spite of thousands of our friends call us heretics. Thank you.